Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Bharatvaarta weekly. We are on episode 77 now. I'm your host Nirav Kanodra and I'm joined by Abhishek, Paul and Prasanna. Hi Abhishek, hi Prasanna.
Hi guys. Hi. Morning.
Hi,
Morning.
hi everyone.
Yeah, so this week was quite action packed. We had like a lot of events. There is the whole uh, Quad foreign ministers meet in Australia. There's an Indo-US vaccine partnership. Novavax has been approved by US and UK. India has rejected Tesla's tax concessions. We had our union budget. India won the Under 19 World Cup, and in some sad news, legendary singer Lata Mangeshkar passed away. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about. So moving ahead. So before you move ahead, in the last week we had a couple of very interesting podcasts. One was the conversation with Dr. Vikram Sampath about rewriting Indian history. He's been a historian outside like the mainstream Indian academia, and he has said about like the whole cancel culture and how like the leftist or the Marxist have hijacked Indian history. And he also spoke about like his books on Veer Savarkar. Prasanna, Abhishek, did any one of you catch the episodes?
Yeah, I saw it. Very insightful, and Vikram's two-volume work on Savarkar counted as a magnum opus. I think it's a stellar work of research, and more power to him. I mean, especially like if you kind of evaluate a revolutionary figure like Savarkar, sans any nuance, right? It's a huge disservice to a figure like him, and also to the entire discipline of history, and especially with the kind of political. See, Savarkar is kind of become the epitome of alternate political vision. Okay, if you kind of look at broadly speaking, Gandhi Nehruvian vision versus an alternate vision, I think Savarkar is a very important figure in that conceptualization, and it's very important that someone like Vikram, did the hard work of going through very extensive research work to publish these two volumes, and excellent that Bharatvaarta hosted him for a podcast series. I think he's a very promising talent, and I wouldn't exactly call him as someone who's outside the mainstream academia. In fact, I think his work on Savarkar is what is probably rendering him outside the the mainstream academic framework. I mean, he is quite I mean, these two volumes have been quite educative and insightful, even for people who have a very nuanced, or even probably they don't demonize Savarkar or something like that. Even a lot of people who are kind of very open about trying to understand his life, his times, his views. I think a lot of them were immensely benefited by Vikram's work, actually. So hopefully we get more such works of our contemporary historical figures. Yeah.
And also we had the other episode discussing the land of God, story of Haryana. It's a very interesting episode going back like to the times of Mahabharata and like Kurukshetra and like taking the history. So the author Arjun Singh Kardian is author as well as a geologist. So I think that's also a very interesting one. Moving ahead. So basically, Indo-US vaccine partnership. A lot of lawmakers have written to President Biden about in an open letter that the US partners and allies were used to use substandard and ineffective Chinese and Russian vaccines, and to have built a partnership with India. So one vaccine called Corbevax has been developed as a result of collaboration between India and the US, and that seems to be a game changer against the global fight in vaccines due to its low price and transport costs. Notably, like China has also decided to donate 600 million doses of Sinovac and other vaccines to poor developing nations in Africa and other parts of the world. And also talking ahead about like Novavax has gotten approval from UK and the US. This is being manufactured by Serum Institute of India, Adar Poonawalla and his firm. And this is asking for authorization in India for like children. This vaccine uses like a protein-based technology as opposed to the other vaccines developed in the West, which are using the mRNA technology. So this might actually convince a lot more people who are hesitant to take the vaccine. So Abhishek, Prasanna, what are your thoughts on this one?
I would say that, this talk about helping out poorer nations has been going on from the start, right? And the basic logic was that unless you vaccinate large parts of the world, you will keep getting new variants emerge. And it's a bit unfortunate that, despite having, I think by the closer to the end of or towards the later part of last year, I think there were sufficient stocks available in a lot of countries, right? Which lot more could have been done to deploy these vaccines to various parts of the world which do not have their own vaccines. I think China definitely tried their best to be ahead in this vaccine diplomacy game, but their challenge has been that probably the effectiveness of their vaccine is more questionable, right? So, I mean, better late than never is all I can say, and one hopes that places like Africa, etc., get quickly vaccinated substantially, right? So that we get lesser possibilities of new variants. I think India, for its part, from the start has been, talking about these things, right? Whether it is patent waiver or, working in collaboration with foreign countries and companies for vaccine development. So, and also helping out the neighborhood, etc., right? When it comes to sending out vaccine stock. I think the only hiccup for us was the second wave, right? When we had to sort of temporarily stop some of these vaccine exports and focus more internally. But other than that, I think India has definitely pushed for these measures throughout, and hopefully it will continue.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, of course, as predicted, this entire vaccine manufacturing and the distribution supply chain has become intricately interlinked with the geopolitics, right? So this was something that was predictable, and it's following a very predictable trajectory. This seems like a effort of some energetic work by the Indian diplomacy. If you look at the the senators and the congressmen, it almost seems like a very bipartisan request for this partnership between India and US on this vaccine front. But I'm kind of want to strike a skeptical note. I mean, there's certainly natural synergy and convergence. Maybe the US does have cutting edge research capability, which has been blasted by the kind of funding that they actually received from the previous Trump administration, right? Like I mean, to give Trump his credit, I think he quickly identified that probably vaccinating on the large scale is the only way to come out of this thing. So I think the Operation Warp Speed was like a very laudable measure. So obviously the research capability is there, and India does have some limited research capability, but a lot of manufacturing capability. So there is natural synergy and convergence, but there is also this element of US itself in terms of access to vaccine players from other countries, right? Like say, even for example, you take Biotech's Covaxin. I don't think so. It's got any emergency use approval as far as US market is concerned. Similarly, I think even for AstraZeneca, right? I think the regulators in the US played very tough, right? I don't think so. It ever got it never.
I think
got the regulation.
Bharat Biotech is probably closer because there is a US company Ocugen pushing for it.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I think like the big name that never went past the regulatory hurdle there in the US was probably AstraZeneca, right? Like I think they were even prepared to extinguish those stocks, but not distributed. Though I think belatedly they made some moves. I don't know how it exactly happened. So there are certainly enormous pharma interests in the US as well. Okay, which would continue to probably look at more Moderna and Pfizer. Moderna more so because I think it's almost done in partnership with the quote unquote the state-run laboratories there. They've played a very predominant. They played a critical role in mRNA vaccine. So they might want to commercialize that on a global scale as well, right? So. Of course, from a manufacturing capability, India is right there, and at this point of time, maybe this kind of a partnership 1 year back, like what Abhishek mentioned, when the Delta wave was at the peak, and it did look that India floundered and all that stuff. Though enough and more people were arguing that the supply chain, it always goes through an initial production hiccup phase before it scales up, right? Like, there were so many acquisitions that, India didn't order adequately. And, you had this, I think like probably US to some extent was 2-3 months ahead of India in terms of the coverage at that point of time. And I think at this point of time, I think it's almost adult coverage seems to be almost like same, or maybe India is even marginally ahead, right? Like, so it's a typical production issue which coincided with India's deadly second wave, So I think that movement was there, but now I think like this could be a partnership which can be more geared towards probably, if you look at the vaccination rates in say parts of Africa and all, it's still dismal. And as Abhishek pointed out, right, still such a globally connected world, right? Actually, the variant that can emerge from even a very tiny nation has quick potential to spread across the world, and with the kind of I think even the civil society and the people across the nations, I think like they are just done and tired of any further lockdowns or travel restrictions, right? So even the ability of the state to deploy instruments like ban on international mobility and travel, I think is going to be highly limited moving forward. So I think this partnership can be useful as a global strategy. But last point on this is that, it was always known that it has to be a globally coordinated strategy to fight this pandemic, right? But it was also pretty predictable that it will degenerate into a geopolitical turf war between nations, actually. So, like if you're very realistic, I wouldn't be too gung-ho about it, but I think it's always good, like wherever there is partnership possibilities, synergy, I think we should look at it.
Totally agree. Moving on. Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar is traveling to Australia for the next Quad meeting. This meeting features US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne, and Japanese Foreign Minister Hayashi Yoshimasa. The interaction will also have like various bilateral meetings. This comes at a backdrop of like aggressive behavior of China across the Indo-Pacific and Russian military presence in Europe, specifically Ukraine. The Quad partnership is one of the prominent issues of the meeting, along with expediting the vaccine rollout, something what we said even in the previous segment. So, Prasanna, Abhishek, what thoughts on this?
You want me to go first? Abhishek, you could, I can probably chip in.
Sure. So I think, Quad has been a important feature of India's foreign policy, right? And uh, this will be the first face-to-face meeting in a while, right? I think the last year one was a virtual one. I think, as you said, the China remains the key issue for the Quad to tackle. But I suppose recent developments in the Ukraine-Russia affair will probably also feature prominently. And so I think there's a lot of discussion in India's whatever foreign policy circles on what India should or should not do, or whose side they should take in uh, vis-a-vis, Russia and Ukraine. And it's interesting, like people seem to think there, or some people seem to think India should sort of unconditionally be on the side of United States. And I don't think that's how, New Delhi sees it. And I suppose Quad is another forum where India will probably make that clear, right? That, it's not like India is going to completely or blindly back the United States. I mean, Russia also has its own viewpoint and its own interests, and also India and Russia have their own relationship that has to be looked at. So, while, I mean, having said all this, it is also true that, over the years, China and Russia have sort of become more and more closer. It's becoming like and their strategic interests to oppose the West are sort of aligning there. So for India, of course, it's a sort of delicate balancing job. But I think there are also folks like, I guess we had a recent guest on Bharatvaarta, right? A foreign policy expert. So I think there is also a realization that India is one of the few, if not the only nations who is actually going, toe to toe with China, right? And we are having actual casualties of our own armed personnel facing China. So India's position cannot be sort of overlooked. And so, I mean, this is the backdrop in which this meeting is happening. And let's see
Just
if
to
there are
add,
any additional things to talk about once
no, so
it's
here,
over.
just to add, like as much as it's a delicate balancing. Like I think geopolitics is very interesting right now. It's a delicate balancing act for all the players involved. And right now, probably the West needs India more to counter China than how much India needs them. So I think there, all these things probably will be discussed and
Yeah.
more.
No, but
Also of interest, there is the Winter Olympics going on in China, where
correct.
a lot of countries have boycotted the opening ceremony with their soldier who fought at Galwan leading the torch-bearing ceremony. So yeah, I think it's very interesting times in geopolitics.
But basically, I do remember sometime, I think it was in 2021 or something, where when India was slightly vulnerable because of the Delta wave, right? This Western policy, geopolitical policy establishment, was always trying to project that India is the weak link in the Quad. You had a spate of editorials from forces who are very close to the state power in all these Western capitals, which kind of adopted a very condescending tone on India's criticality. See here, like just the point that Abhishek just made, right? We share a border with China. We have soldiers on the ground actually fighting China, which none of the other Quad nations, either by either they don't share a geographic border with China. Maybe they face a economic challenge, or a trade related challenge, or more an economic challenge is what they face, right? Like India is the only country which actually faces a expansionist military.
So you could say that some of them face a maritime challenge.
Maritime potentially by extension, maybe like since US kind of regards Taiwan as a very critical instrument of its overall, apparatus, defense apparatus. Like there is by extension, there is some potential thing, but I mean, we've actually put soldiers on the ground to resist them. And, I think Quad is dead without India, basically, this entire rhetoric thing. And if you look at all the other countries, and also from an economic front, right, like India is like one of the few countries which actually took the plunge and banned some of the Chinese apps, right, which is still not done in, say, countries like US and all that. India, of course, fighting on the trade deficit front, like we've kind of been very choosy, or almost the quantum of capital in Indian infrastructure projects, which by the way, China has a lot to offer, right? Like we've rebuffed it more or less, So India is actually not only in the forefront of resisting Chinese expansion, it's actually done stuff which I wouldn't really say is true of the other pillars in the Quad, right? Like if you still look at it, though there might be a bipartisan rhetoric against China emerging from US, but the US financial industry and the US financial capital is so deeply integrated with the Chinese economic system that like even if the US state wants to disengage or kind of go on an aggressive mode against China, the level of what's typically called the mutually assured destruction, right? I think like none of these countries, even Australia, I think of late has been little more I would call quote unquote adventurous on this, but Japan, I mean, I would at least understand that pacifism is a very integral part of their overall foreign policy, what I call the orientation. But even you can say Japan has recently shown some ability to, needle, I would put it mildly, though like at the first sign of Chinese pushback, I think they generally kind of retire to their typical, foreign policy orientation. So, this entire Quad is like, if Quads is conceptualized and designed, besides all that democracy, commitment to a certain worldview and all that, but the real thing is about China containment strategy. India is the linchpin of Quad, and Quad is, I think, like, as good as dead if India's role is undermined in it.
Okay, so moving on, we had the Union Budget 2023 on 1st of Feb. So the broad strokes this year, there have been priorities on energy transition, climate action, introducing the digital rupee, a central bank digital currency, as well as tax on crypto assets, and a lot of focus on infra development. There has been a 196 crore allocation towards in the PLI scheme towards solar equipment manufacturing. Also, there will be 5G spectrum auctions this year. In other parts of infrastructure push, we are seeing contracts being awarded to provide optical fiber in rural areas, and additional funds set aside for rural housing. So, any thoughts on the budget or any specific points that you guys would like to highlight?
Yeah. First thing, Nirav, I think the government needs to be congratulated for not taking the populist route, right? You have a extremely critical set of state elections. I mean, the biggest state in India going, and then they had a fairly, this time the revenue figures were pretty impressive, especially on the tax collection front, both in direct and indirect taxes. So they resisted the temptation of opening the coffers and moving towards a welfarist orientation. Maybe I was thinking that probably the unorganized workers, they have this Shramdan portal where they've collected the data of around 15 crore folks working in the unorganized sector across state, and significantly UP and West Bengal is where the bulk of this number comes from, So I think like they had the ability to target and, do either a cash transfer or something for this unorganized sector, which also triggers better formalization, which has been a design and policy objective of the government. But surprisingly, I mean, a lot of credit to them for not for resisting the populism. And as an infra enthusiast, my really excited by the kind of focus that this government is bringing into the infrastructure push. If you see, basically, the revenue expenditure is almost, consumes so much of the expenditure, right? And like your committed revenue expenditure. So the pool of funds that are available for capital expenditure is very limited actually. And so, the entire focus this time, almost even if you kind of look at some of the money that is going to go into extinguishing the debt of Air India post the sale and all that, I think there's a huge, if you look at the road sector, if you look at the railway sector, 25 to 35% increase in capital expenditure for these sectors. And more importantly, one of the things that have not been discussed a lot is like 1 lakh crore 50-year loans to the state for capital expenditure. Some of the capital expenditure that is undertaken by the central government, either through PSUs or they do like real large-scale infrastructure projects like bullet trains, your Delhi-Mumbai Expressway, NHAI projects and all, which typically have long gestation periods, right? Like from the time you conceptualize to execute, land acquisition challenges. Typically, a lot of the central government projects have multi-state linkages and all that. So the entire execution is a fairly longer period. But like say the capital expenditure undertaken by the states, and states otherwise generally are very reluctant to do capital expenditure because of the political economy. It's much more easy for them to do welfare schemes with cyclical, electoral considerations. And most states are very focused only on paying their employees, pensions, they don't have much incentive electorally from a political economic perspective to do capital infra, right? So this way, by giving this money, I think, and which can only be spent on capital expenditure projects, states have the ability to quickly do projects, right? Like for example, a small village road or some urban development in a tier 2 city, where I think the mobilization and the execution can be done in a much quicker. Typically, even project sizes of 100 crores and all, you could almost try to get the work going within 3 to 6 months actually. So that's another brilliant thing that has been done. So the infrastructure focus has been pretty phenomenal, and I think this entire government's, it is very the fiscal conservative approach, right? Like even has been a very defining feature of this government. So basically, I think their economic philosophy, just to sum up, and probably after that Abhishek could add on, is like I kind of see three large pillars. One is basically building massive infrastructure actually. The second thing is in terms of very targeted welfare schemes actually. Where you prevent leakage, you typically use a jam kind of tech stack to do the delivery. So it's an infra welfareism and bit of fiscal conservatism, right? Like where you do welfare, more a position welfare rather than like just like being welfareist all throughout, right? Actually, so which is also very critical when you're doing complex changes to the economy, like formalization. Say something like driving those kind of radical changes. If you're doing to the underlying economic structure, I think the welfareism is very critical, because ultimately you need to political economy is also critical, right? Actually, maybe the economists are not bothered by that, but politicians have to balance between political consideration and economics. So, this has been the underlying philosophy, and this budget, uh, even the previous budget, consistently reflects this ethos. Probably in terms of criticism, like you could always say that, like, I mean, it kind of looks at medium term and long term, while you have the bottom of the pyramid, I mean, the different alphabet named K shape or whatever they call it, right? Like, which is not going to aid immediate consumption demands. So the immediate boost to the consumption by putting cash in the hand of the people is something that certainly the budget doesn't have, though. I think the thinking is basically to use infrastructure as a way to, kickstart the economic growth. So overall, I think there is a consistent philosophy in thinking which cuts through the budget. Last thing, maybe the disinvestment. I think like probably they realized that typically, PSU disinvestment is a 2-year cycle, right? Like you take Air India. BPCL, honestly, I wouldn't blame them. I think it's more to do with the way in which the ESG driven investment philosophies, which is kind of, according to me, finding buyers is going to be very difficult for any company which is in the traditional oil or coal sector, right? Like, so that is going to be an ongoing challenge to find a very interesting buyer, though BPCL is profitable, right? So, but I think the disinvestment secretary has kind of clearly given the roadmap that Shipping Corporation of India, BEML, they are going to be BPCL. These three companies will be disinvested the next year. I mean, privatized, strategic privatization, and then they are going to do LIC IPO and few other IPOs of PSU. So I think, like, at some point of time, I'm sure, like, from intent perspective, this government is unambiguously committed to PSU disinvestment, but you also need to look at what is possible, the execution possibilities within the larger context of political economy. So you need to be realistic. So I think the 75,000 crores or whatever that they have projected as the disinvestment proceeds from next year is face some criticism, but I think it's another sign of realism. See, the last two budgets have also been very increasingly realistic on numbers. Almost the historic fudgings that have happened in the budgets for the last 2-3 decades, almost they're correcting everything, So I think there is a, realistic numbers. So I would actually rate it like, say, 7 on 10.
Actually, yeah, adding a couple of things. So one is they've depoliticized the budget, right? So despite elections, earlier railway budgets, they have stopped tinkering with personal tax rates. The budget is what it should be. It's a statement of accounts. Where are you spending the money? Where are you generating the revenue? And lastly, instead, at the margin, that while welfareism is there, at the margin, they focused a lot more on capex. Key stats I want to point out. So 7.5 lakh crores is spending on capex. So not revenue expenditure, but capex, and this is up 35% year on year. Another stat I want to point out is that they've kept the targeted run rate of GST collections as 1.3 lakh crores a month. We actually got 1.4 lakh crores in Jan. I'm hoping this number is more in 1.4 to 1.5 lakh crores.
There is a bit of seasonality, right?
Yeah, no, there's a bit of seasonality, but if you just look at like the run rate, so maybe the numbers, as you mentioned, that they are a bit more conservative. So we could actually overshoot on revenues, right? So which helps in like capex as well as other revenue expenditure, etc. Right? So I think a lot of positives to unpack. Agreed that there are like constraints. You cannot you cannot give handouts all the time. You have constraints of your own revenues, right? And so yes, I think regardless, I think best was that it's a statement of accounts and not change anything for the average consumer, average person on the street. No more taxes as well as no tax cut. This also changes, this allows longer term thinking, because people, companies, everybody can plan for the long term without having like too many unnecessary tweaks on tax rates, tax structures, whether it be GST or income tax or corporate tax. I think India has reached a stable level of taxes. And after COVID, where our debt has gone up a lot and India has a very high fiscal deficit, it's a glide path to come back to normal over like a few years, right? So I think that's a very good sign. Moving on, we have a lot to cover today. So we already spoke about Covovax being approved. So India rejects Tesla's request for tax concessions. Basically, India has asked the company to commit to local manufacturing, assembling, and sourcing norms. Musk had requested India to lower taxes to allow the company to sell vehicles at a competitive price that were completely built outside. Whereas India has asked Tesla to consider importing knockdown units or partially building the vehicles in India, which attracts a lower import duty. So very quickly, what thoughts on this, Abhishek?
No, I think India is pretty clear that companies like Tesla have to come and build and produce in India. And so, I mean, this decision of rejecting their call for tax break is sort of in line with that. And till Tesla, for example, presents a plan for local manufacturing and procurement, etc., this will continue. So interesting thing is every other state government was also asking for Tesla to come to India and set up shop here, right? So I think that's also we are consistent in that way, right? So let someone like a Tesla come to India and then things
Absolutely.
can move forward.
Absolutely. I think our PLI schemes are pretty generous for building electric vehicles.
So the
A lot of
thing
the
is
two-wheeler-
also like giving one of the wealthiest companies in the
Yes.
world specific tax breaks, etc., is not like a very
Also,
not
the
an easy
segment.
decision to sell, right? I mean, the same people who are calling for Tesla to come will be jumping up and down if you take the other decision. So,
Yeah.
uh,
So yeah, there are the states which kind of oppose Tata Nano. They
right.
want Tesla to come in. So anyways, like Tesla at its price point obviously has like a limited set of demand. A lot more
Yeah, I mean,
on electric
Tesla,
two-wheelers as well as domestic car manufacturers like Tatas, Mahindras. They also have their
I
EV
mean,
plan.
long term, given how India is, right? I mean, Tesla should think of India more as a place to build rather than a place to sell. I
Yes.
mean, I'm sure you can sell off your Tesla inventory in 2-3 weeks to those who want to buy, but after that, what will you do, right? So that's how it is.
No, but only just to play the devil's advocate, like say China, for instance, right? I think maybe when 2014 onwards, they've been selling Tesla cars in China, but the first gigafactory outside US, I think like which probably came up where in Shanghai or Beijing, there's a just not remember.
Shanghai, outside Shanghai.
Outside Shanghai. That I think was like 2019, right? Actually, so
Yeah.
like even though Tesla was selling outside the US market, I think from manufacturing perspective, I think like they have one right now in Shanghai and probably one they're setting it up in Germany or somewhere in Berlin. So, maybe one could always argue that, the domestic manufacturing happens after they've sold so many cars. So that's one argument actually. But again, I'm sure the policymakers are faced of the issue. Yeah.
Absolutely. Also, the other thing is, see, there were other things in China where China had like the whole big pollution issue and wanted to accelerate EVs, right? And now the biggest selling electric cars are made by Chinese manufacturers like BYD, etc. So absolutely. So I think China had some other set of constraints. India has probably some other set of constraints. Yeah. And you want to be fair. What rules are applied for, like, say, Mercedes Benz? The same rule should be applied to Tesla.
Correct.
And India wants to develop its own electric mobility. So these kind of concessions, I think they're free to come and sell cars, right? Come sell imported cars. I think the ones who want or as a status symbol, they would be paying up the duty, etc. Right? So correct. I think it's just a matter of being fair. Moving on. So Meta lost 230 billion after their earnings call. That's a fall of 26.4% in a single day. That's the biggest wipeout for any company in the history of financial markets. The quarterly figures disappointed the investors, and you saw Mark Zuckerberg personally $31 billion of his personal net worth was being wiped out. So Meta warned of slowing revenue growth in the face of competitions from rival platforms, including TikTok and YouTube.
Correct.
What thoughts on this thing? Are we at the cusp of like the end of this whole FANG story, or like the?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, Meta. So probably I think it's a Meta meltdown, right? I mean, I'm sure. See, I think there are structural challenges for the company. I don't think so. This is some episodic, seasonal kind of a thing. I think they have some deep-rooted structural challenges. First, of course, I think never in its history has there been a net user decline, right? And even in geographies outside US, which is quite frankly worrying for the company. And of course, Zuckerberg himself acknowledged that he's, basically TikTok has emerged as a competition which is weaning away so many users. So that is one. Apple's privacy rule seems to be a huge cause of grief for Meta, like almost estimated loss of 10 billion revenue. I think Facebook thrived on this precision and targeted advertising, right? Like, so when you have this huge Apple ecosystem, which effectively has turned off a very important input for you to for your advertising, targeted advertising, I think real trouble, I would say. And the metaverse is still a vision, right? I mean, and he's putting in a lot of money, and to give credit to him, like maybe 1 year back, it looked like one utopian vision, or he was kind of selling a pipe dream. But if you really look at the other players, even Microsoft is as much into this space, right? So to that extent, you should give him a credit for being a quote unquote a visionary on this. And but you don't know how this is going to unfold. At this point of time, it seems like a very it's an idea backed by a lot of money as well, but that's not something that's going to excite shareholders in short term or medium term. So I mean, and the kind of correction seems quite, I don't know, like any one of you have exposure to Facebook shares, but I think like seems like quite sharp and pretty shocking.
So actually, like looking at broader market, what you mentioned. So after the Facebook results, like Snap fell 20%, and then Snap results came up, so it went up 50% because the results were actually good. Snapchat. And similarly, you've seen like a lot of volatility even in Amazon shares.
So yeah, I think the point to make is maybe we need to decouple this acronym, right? So different companies within that group will have different fortunes now based on, because Amazon, for example, had a tremendous result, right? So to say that, and also I think overall the market did all right after the Amazon results, etc. Or say Microsoft is doing so well. So I think Facebook has its own particular challenges. Probably TikTok is giving them a really tough time, right? And I mean, of course, Trump did not go through with his TikTok ban. So, and obviously, for whatever you say, that is a tremendous product, right? Given its popularity in India as well, pre-ban, right? So we know that. So yeah, I think, so I was just reading somewhere that people are now calling that it's time to look at Meta as a value stock rather than a growth stock. So, so it's kind of transitioned into that kind of multiples and numbers.
See, also when Amazon started reporting the cloud number, right? Separately, maybe 4-5 years or maybe 3-4 years back. At that time, I think the cloud was clearly already looking like a winner, right? In terms of the business viability and in terms of how it was growing. But I think like when Zuckerberg is reporting numbers on the investment sunk into metaverse, right? It looks quite dismal at this point of time, right? So, I think like enough and more reasons I would see that the investors got bit spooked by the numbers, and also the regulatory headwinds, right? For him is there. I mean, over and above that, I don't know, somehow they seem to be at the crosshair of all the regulatory action, especially in the US. And, I mean, I think once after the 2016 US presidential elections, I think like it's been the PR for the company has been and I think like they earned the wrath of the very powerful liberal establishment there as well. And then by the time, he could get his act together and do what the liberals wanted to do in the 2020 elections, I think like by that time I mean, I think like his reputation had kind of, sunk.
they seem to get disproportionately bad press as well.
Correct. And also that whistleblower within the system, I forgot that who worked as a product manager, and then that entire heightened coverage over her testimonial and all that stuff. And I don't know, like somehow, like for example, I think he wanted to do an Instagram reel or whatever for the kids, right? Which seems to be triggering so much opposition, while I think TikTok is able to do all that without any scrutiny as much, even in the US. So which is clearly coming out to what Abhishek just said, that somehow disproportionate focus on Zuckerberg and his company.
So moving on, India win the 5th Under-19 World Cup championship. India beat England by 4 wickets in the final, with the wicketkeeper actually hitting a 6 to hit the winning runs.
Oh, okay.
So memories of 2011. Also, there were a couple of stars. So I followed it a bit. I think like apart from the captain Yash Dhul, the vice captain Rais Sheikh, they scored a lot of runs. There are a couple of all-rounders. There was Ravi Bawa, who scored 160 versus Uganda, and he took a 5-wicket haul in the final. So I think that gives memories of like Kapil Dev. So Uganda is, I think, neighboring Zimbabwe. So that's a positive as well as like left arm seamer Ravi Kumar took a lot of wickets. There were a couple of spin bowling all-rounders, Vicky Ostwal, Kaushal Tambe. So yes, it looks very interesting. A lot of young cricketers coming in the pipeline.
They made I just saw the result in the morning. Looks like they made a heavy weather of the chase, almost lost 6 wickets, and it still, I think like probably the only Under-19 final that I ever watched was the one between India and Bangladesh. Was it 2020, right?
Last one.
Yeah, the last one which we lost.
Which we lost. I think like they had a revised target under some
green rules.
So yeah, I didn't see any of the matches other than semi-finals actually. That too, I think after both the Centurions got out, I saw that last 10 overs, and I think like they struggled for around 5 overs, but in the last 5 overs against Australia, I think they just went berserk. I think the Sindhu and the other guy, I forgot his name. So, but if you really look at like say the last 10 years, India has had a disproportionate success, right, in Under-19. Yes. Like I think 4 times they have, now it's 5. I think 5 times they have won, and probably almost 3 times or 2 times into the
losing finals, yeah.
Into the finals, right? Like so I don't know, but if you really look at like say 15, let's say even from 2007 to 2021, 2 years once it happened, no? So 10 years, 150 to 200 players would have played. Maybe you can think of what, around 10 who made very successful transition to international cricket. I mean, I'm just not trying to be kind of, taking away this glorious movement from the young people, but Yuvraj Singh probably, Ravindra Jadeja, I think, played in two.
Ravindra Jadeja, Pujara, then
Pujara.
Even
Virat
Kohli, right?
Kohli was a winning captain.
Yeah.
Kohli was a winning captain.
Yeah.
And
I think the comparison with Kohli is what hurts a lot of. They are not able to kind of, I think that hype, once you get compared to such a legendary figure like Kohli, after that, I think the career that this is Delhi captain, right? The former Delhi captain.
Gurmukh Chand.
Finally, I think like he
Playing
realized.
in the US.
Yeah, I mean he migrated.
He dropped from the Ranji team as well.
Yeah, he took the citizenship of US after he gave up his thing. And interestingly, when in the Virat Kohli's winning team, there was another. I just tracked this guy's career. Another Kohli was there in the team. Who outscored Kohli in I think 3 of those 5 matches in that under-19 World Cup, and his career, like basically, I think like he finally ended up Uttarakhand, Tripura, like that in the domestic circuit, right? Like so, I think that. But some of them are able to win good under-19, especially when it's timed around the IPL auctions. I think like recency effect helps some of them win huge. What's that Rajasthan player, the last World Cup?
Jaiswal.
Yashasvi Jaiswal.
I think Bishnoi also, I think, got a good deal.
Bishnoi was there. Prithvi Shaw. So notably Prithvi Shaw, Shubman Gill, and then couple of quick bowlers in KKR, Nagar Koti and Shivam Mavi.
Also
came. So they were all part of one team. I think they won in 2018. I think they won in 2018.
2018, yeah.
So I think it's a good thing. See, my viewpoint is India does very well, or like the subcontinent teams do very well in under-19, where skill is more dominant.
Correct.
But as you go towards discipline, fitness, where your diet, as the players get older,
correct,
and to step up another level, that is where your countries like Australia, England, etc., they do better because they are consistent for longer.
Correct. I think even the fast bowlers, I think, they kind of develop that speed probably when like they hit 22, 23.
Yes.
Because I particularly didn't see anybody, bowling like super quick. I mean, maybe I missed actually. So, all that kind of.
Yeah. And then probably some of them get injured quite early, or they get too much media attention and too much, sometimes maybe the mental side of the game gets affected as well, right? So who knows?
How is the selection done, Nirav? Any idea for under-19? I'm just curious, like how.
So the selection, so Rahul Dravid was like the previous coach, and the whole NCA, the team was practicing at NCA, the selection was done, and there were a lot of COVID cases. In one of the games versus Uganda, they just had 11 players who were not having COVID. That is where this Raj Baba scored like 160. I think. So
Yashdul also had COVID, I think, and then he was able to.
Yes. So I think Yashdul had to be out of one game or something. Okay. Yeah, I think that was the one. So it was like classic. If you just go back, like it is classic where the team probably is in trouble versus like an African nation very weak. So it's like India versus Zimbabwe all over again.
So one thing I'll probably just say, and I didn't really follow this tournament, but just looking at the names of the players, and I was just seeing from who is from where. I think one good thing is, players are not just no longer only the top city like Delhi, Mumbai, or Chennai, these kind of places. I mean, players are coming from all over the place, right? Now, who will be successful in future, we don't know. But what it means is that at least the BCCI is able to get the best talent regardless of location, and that is what you can do.
I was also, because in fact,
administrators, right?
In fact, if the United States of South India types look at the squad, it's almost like not anyone from thing. But I was very happy to see all the not even the tier 2 cities. You could actually call it from, I mean, couple of guys from Rohtak, Bhilwara, Maharashtra mein Nanded, pretty thing. And but I think like the center of gravity is decisively shifted up north in terms of the cricketing talent. At least if you're looking at the under 19 talent pool, so that Delhi, Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan is where I guess a lot of talent is emerging. Actually, I think Mumbai probably, I don't know, it's structural decline, I guess, in terms of new cricketing talent. And Uganda team was almost like 9 Gujaratis.
Yeah. Similar, like I think UAE team was also like all Indian team. All of them are Indian passport holders as well. So moving on, just earlier today, the legendary singer Lata Mangeshkar passed away. She was 92 years old. I think everyone has like a lot of favorite songs. I think right, she's sung across generations for like various actresses, and been really, if you would like to mention like one kind of like a stalwart of Indian music, and a lot of people are just remembering her rendition of like "Ae Mere Watan Ke Logo" in 1963 after the 62 war. That was like quite it causes like tear jerks in like a lot of people. So Prasanna, Abhishek, anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like a legend cutting across generations, and incidentally, like she's, I mean, though like I do have I mean, I grew up on Tamil music, Tamil film music, a lot of Tamil film music, and basically, where I'm like a huge devotee of a Tamil composer called Ilayaraja. And in fact, she has sung a brilliant number in Tamil. I think like probably she sung 2 songs in Tamil. This one particular number is like, I mean, it was a very tough song to render. It's actually a Kamal Haasan movie, which came in the late 80s. Very, very nicely done movie. And she was her fabulous singing, or just a mind-blowing song. So, I mean, and of course, the body of work that she's done in Hindi, pretty phenomenal, even for somebody who's not like deeply engaged with Hindi film music. I could easily name 20-25 songs which are hugely thing, and she's a legend in terms of the patriotism, in terms of epitomizing what India's popular culture should stand for. Very, very sad moment.
Also very illustrious family. Like her
father was a Savarkar.
Her sister Asha Bhosle. So absolutely, like it's.
I think they come from a Savarkar kind of a family with pretty vociferous about their, patriotism, and to some extent their politics as well, actually. So, I mean, remarkable career. And I think the little that I understand of Hindi music industry, I think 60s and 70s, it's not that nostalgia. Like I always keep telling me that whether we like the old songs merely because it's nostalgia. I think that entire constellation of music directors and singers which emerged in the Hindi movie industry, right? Like from Roshan to Naushad to Madan Mohan, phenomenal, and then of course Asha Lata adding a lot of gravitas to the compositions, right? I think like that was a golden era of Hindi music, which I might see, because like my kind of understand only when I grew up, it was basically the 80s, 90s Hindi song of Nadeem Shravan ke geet mein Kumar Sanu ka whatever, right? I mean that's the kind of thing. And so now you have you can sit back and do a decadal comparison, right? And I think probably 90s was probably not the best time for Hindi movie industry in terms of musical sensibilities change and all that, but I'm just talking about like the evolution and the dynamics. It can be either for quote unquote, there can be an aesthetic upliftment in terms of the entire musicality, arrangement, and all that. I think 90s was a bad. I mean, not bad is a relative word. 1990s was not the greatest decade of Hindi movie industry, but 60s and 70s, and I think like that's the era that Lataji is very closely identified with, right? I mean, that period, 60s and 70s. Of course, she must have sung a lot of good songs later also. But even as somebody who's getting engaged with a large Hindi music world, right? I find 60s and 70s now very appealing. And at that time, when I'm now listening to a lot of 60s and 70s, it's very clear that the Tamil movie industry at that point of time, the film music was very inspired by Hindi. While I think it kind of dramatically changed in 90s and 2000s, where the music from South or more from Tamil actually was kind of the pioneer, so as to speak. So I think great era actually, and she's a icon from that era.
Absolutely. That's it for this week. So next week we have another episode as part of Alina's Talks, which is in partnership with Bharatvaarta. That's in conversation with Edward Lutwa. This is on the whole geopolitics and the new global power competition. We've seen like Russia and China, as you mentioned earlier, coming to closer. Russia flexing its muscles in like Ukraine, the whole possibility of a conflict in Taiwan. So I think this looks to be like a very interesting episode. So that's all for this week. Till next week. Thank you and Jai Hind.